Welcome to this week's Movie Math, which is an Iron Man special report. First, we're going to take a look at Marvel Studios' ever-expanding box office footprint, and then I'll give you my own review of the movie, complete with my thoughts on the big twist. But while Iron Man 3 might have surprised everyone story-wise, everyone could see its box office success coming a mile away. In fact, Marvel Studios' decision to basically make this movie The Avengers 2 literally paid off, as Iron Man 3 delivered the second biggest opening of all time, only bested by The Avengers. And as I'm sure Robert Downey Jr.'s agent will point out, he's the star of both those movies. As I previously reported, Downey Jr. made $50 million off of The Avengers alone, and with his Marvel contract now expired, he's likely to make a whole lot more in the future. I say likely though, because incredibly, he still doesn't have that new contract. And rumor is that's why the after-credits sequence here doesn't allude to another movie, aka Tony Stark blasting into space for Guardians of the Galaxy, as we've been promised. In fact, at the very end of the movie, it's promised that Tony Stark will return, but it doesn't say when. Guardians director James Gunn must be sweating out this contract negotiation like crazy, as I don't know if anyone will be excited about a Downey Jr.-less space movie starring Chris Pratt, Zoe Saldana, Dave Bautista, Michael Rooker, and a CGI raccoon. But that's a worry for another day, as today Marvel Studios continues to prove it was well worth the $4 billion Disney paid for it. Worldwide, the flick has almost hit $700 million in 2 weeks. The Avengers crossed the billion mark 19 days after opening overseas, and we've got numbers for Iron Man 3 through day 12. Can it beat the Avengers record? But this impressive box office performance raises some other questions as well. Will the success of the Avengers trickle down to all the Marvel movies or just the ones starring Robert Downey Jr.? And can Marvel Studios afford to wait out signing Downey Jr.'s new contract until Thor: The Dark World comes out in November to find out? Plus, will Man of Steel enjoy the same trickle-down effect from Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy? Thankfully, this time Warner Bros. Is releasing their DC movie in 3D, so it can compete financially at the same level as Marvel's movies. And what does all this mean for Shane Black, as this is only the second film the legendary screenwriter has ever directed, after the low-budget crime comedy Kiss Kiss Bang Bang? I say it's sweet justice for his criminally overlooked The Long Kiss Goodnight. Hey, maybe he can bring Gina Davis into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. As for the rest of the weekend box office, clearly audiences were happy to leave the spring slate behind, as the number 2 pick, Pain and Gain, only brought in a mere $7 million, down a disappointing 60% or so from its opening weekend. But an interesting side effect of Iron Man 3's uber success was that Matthew McConaughey's Indy Mud was able to crack the top 10, despite only playing in about 600 theaters. As for this coming weekend, The Great Gatsby might have to settle for a second-place debut with an expected $37 million, as at this rate, it's likely Iron Man 3 will continue to hold on to the top spot. And Peoples is expected to debut with $13 million, which is on the low side for a Tyler Perry movie. Maybe he should start making them all interconnected? Okay, so as we get started here, let me kind of give you some perspective of where I stand on comic book movies. The Dark Knight is actually one of, as I've said before, one of my 3 favorite movies of all time, along with Rear Window and Raising Arizona. And I feel The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan really changed comic book movies and how they're perceived, and if serious filmmakers want to work on them. That said, though, I feel that last year, I felt The Dark Knight Rises was kind of a throwaway film, and I didn't feel his heart was really into it, which is a whole other discussion, which I plan to have with you before Man of Steel. But I do think that at the same time, while Nolan's trilogy kind of fizzled a little bit, I feel that The Avengers, thanks to Joss Whedon, really solidified and became the strongest it's ever been. I mean, The Avengers was my favorite movie of last year. Not enough to knock The Dark Knight off of my top 3. I still feel The Dark Knight is a better film than The Avengers, but The Avengers is hands down a better film than The Dark Knight Rises. Anyway, you can imagine how delighted I was to discover that Iron Man 3 is basically a continuation of The Avengers. So I feel that Marvel's really on a roll with that, and I feel that this is almost a perfect follow-up. I'll get into that in a few minutes, but where they miss is with the twist, which we'll discuss. But I want to give my non-spoiler review first. So, yes, I think that Iron Man 3 is basically the Avengers 1.5, but through the lens of Tony Stark. I mean, it's all about his character, and I also enjoy just watching Robert Downey Jr. play Tony Stark. He's just fantastic. I think a ton of people get great joy out of that, and that's why I feel ultimately Marvel will write him that big check. They're just really dragging their feet about having to do it. But the other fingerprints on this movie, which are really noticeable in a fascinating way, are Shane Black's. Now, Shane Black, he's the Lethal Weapon screenwriter, but he's a product of 90s Hollywood. And in fact, I wouldn't even say he's a product, but he was so successful, he shaped 90s Hollywood. And I just think it's fascinating to me that he just basically dusted off his 90s playbook and applied it here, but it still worked. I mean, think about all the 90s staples that are in this movie. You've got the villain gets a makeover and becomes cooler. With Aldrich Killian. You've got the little boy, who helps out the hero. You've got Miami. You've got a speedboat. Christmas, the Christmas setting. I mean, that's right out of these old action movies. And yet it doesn't feel dated here, which I think probably is kudos to Robert Downey Jr. I would also have to give kudos, though, furthermore to Shane Black, that something I've discussed a lot on Beyond the Trailer is that a pet peeve of mine is when a studio will find a great filmmaker but who hasn't worked with special effects before and then let them try out for the first time on one of their big properties. And I'm like, go let them cut their teeth somewhere else, and then you don't want like what happened with like Bryan Singer with the X-Men franchise, where X2 was leaps and bounds better because he was so much more familiar with the technology. However, I don't know if Shane Black maybe had a great backup crew, similar to how Brad Bird did for Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. But he nailed this. You would not be able to tell that the only other movie he ever directed, as I said in the beginning of this Iron Man special edition, was Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. So I was really impressed with that. And I just, I really liked the film a lot. As I said, it's almost a perfect movie. It's almost a perfect Iron Man movie. And I'd be interested to know where the divide lies, because I really liked Iron Man 2 better than Iron Man 1, and so I'm curious to see if Iron Man 2 fans like Iron Man 3 and Iron Man 1 fans don't. So write your thoughts on that down below. Now, all right, we're going into spoiler territory here. The twist. I knew the twist going in, because on Friday morning, one of you wrote me an email very angry about Iron Man 3, and I opened it to read it, and I did not know there was the twist was going to be explained in there, and I saw it, and I couldn't unsee it, and so I went in. Even when you saw I did the interviews on Friday, I knew what people were referring to. But I decided to go in and be like, okay, let's see what happens. I have to say that I think that Marvel made one crucial error, and if they had not made this error, everyone would have loved the twist. And I think the problem is that Aldrich Killian is played by Guy Pearce. Not to take away from Guy Pearce's performance, the guy did a great job, but just imagine how much cooler it would have been to see Aldrich Killian fighting at the end with his body lighting up and that dragon tattoo. I thought the effect looked fantastic, and it was played by an Asian actor. I think that would have just sealed the deal. Everyone would have been fine with the twist, and it would have actually been smart for the Mandarin to use a Middle Eastern image to try and, as the scapegoat, when in fact it wasn't Middle Eastern terrorism, which everybody assumes these days. And I think it would have been really fascinating, and it really would have added some needed diversity to comic book movies, and into the Marvel universe. And so I went with some people who aren't comic book fans, and they love the twist. And I explained to them what my problem with it was, and they were like, "Well, so what? What does it matter? Why does the Mandarin have to be Asian?" And I explained to them. I said, "Well, first, not only is it you're just totally writing off decades of history with the character, but why is he called the Mandarin then? And even if you might say, well, that's just the name he chose, and so when Aldrich Killian said, I'm actually the Mandarin, he was just kind of saying that in jest, or in bitter irony, I guess. But I feel, why does he have the dragon tattoos then? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Why does he have this Asian motif? And going forward, why would he have that? Why would he continue to call himself the Mandarin, or reasonably be referred to that way? And I would say that Marvel probably would have done this. They probably would have cast an Asian actor if not for the fact that DMG Entertainment from China financed a large part of the film, and they wanted it to play really well in China. I have no problem with China becoming a big movie market. I think it's very exciting, but I think it's going to be a problem if it's going to affect movies creatively like this. And I don't understand why anyone thinks that Asian audiences would be offended. Everybody loves Heath Ledger as the Joker. Everybody loves Tom Hardy as Bane. Villains are very popular. I think I think it would be, a badge of honor to have a really cool Marvel villain be Asian. I mean, that's just my opinion. I mean, if it was a female villain, I wouldn't be like, why is it always the female villains? I wouldn't get all angry about it. Also on that note, though, the only other small problem I had is I thought that Pepper to the rescue at the end seemed a little hollow and a little forced. I don't think Gwyneth Paltrow quite sold it. Although, on the flip side, I was annoyed that she had the extremist powers taken away so quickly. I would think, you know, Tony should just fix the exploding part, because otherwise that would be very helpful for Pepper to, you know, be able to defend herself, because Tony didn't catch her. So I think he might not catch her in the future. Although maybe I'm misunderstanding it and he did fix the extremist tech and that's how he saved himself. A little unclear on that. But otherwise, I had a great time. It was a great throwback to when the action movies had their heyday, thanks to people like Shane Black. It was updated appropriately and it fit in perfectly with the Marvel Universe. I highly recommend you go see it. And also, but I would say you don't need to see it in 3D. I saw it in 3D IMAX. I loved seeing it on an IMAX, but really there was like no 3D at all. So, I mean, I just had to see it in 3D because that was like the package deal. But if you're going to not see it on an IMAX screen, I think you can just see it on the biggest 2D screen you can find. So overall, I give Iron Man 3, I give it a 9. I took a point off for what they did with the Mandarin because I just felt it was disrespectful to the character and it was an easy fix. So write your own thoughts down below. Thanks for asking for my review. I hope you enjoyed this special edition of Movie Math. And over the summer, I'm still going to continue to do a mix of, you know, audience reviews, my reviews, stuff like that. But for the really big movies, I'm going to have, when I do an audience review, I'm going to try and do my own review the Monday after on Movie Math. So thanks for watching. I hope you'll subscribe. Bye.